Right, hello everyone. So today I would like to talk about a book by an author called Martin Amis called London Fields. Who is Martin Amis? Martin Amis is a very famous contemporary, well, he's dead now, but anyway, modern British author, considered to be one of the greatest authors in the post-war period, the son of another author called Kingsley Amis, a friend of Christopher Hitchens. He wrote a book in the early 80s called Money, which I read like 20 years ago when I was a teenager, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And that's why I read this book, or one of the reasons why I decided to sit down and read London Fields. Money was a great book. Money was a fun book about a kind of bulky, kind of bouncer type, thuggish English guy who, for whatever reason, he managed to get involved in the advertising industry, and he made like really sexual adverts, but which were very successful. And somehow or another, I'm not going to tell you the entire plot, but somehow or another he got involved in making a movie in Hollywood. So he was flying back and forth, London to America, London and back and forth. He had this crazy girlfriend and then all these crazy characters, and it was very dirty and fun and interesting. Great book, really enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy this book as much. This book was a disappointment in comparison to Money. Why? Three reasons. I'll give you three reasons. Reason number one: none of the characters were likable in any way whatsoever. They were all just totally scummy, selfish, weak, nasty people, really. Like, none of them really had any redeeming qualities at all. Well, I mean, some were worse than other. I mean, the main antagonist of the book, Keith, was obviously the worst character, but the other guy was a scumbag as well. He wasn't a good person. Sam wasn't a good person, and Nicholas Six wasn't a good person either. There were basically four central characters to the book. I'll tell you the story in a minute. I'll tell you the plot in a minute. But none of these people had really any redeeming good characteristics. They were bad people, and so it just made it very difficult for me to emotionally invest in the book. Now, I've said for a long time that in order to create a great story, you need to have a really bad guy, or a really good bad guy, whatever way you want to phrase it. You need to have a bad guy that's really nasty, okay? Somebody that people can really hate. Because if you've got a really bad guy, then the hero will shine, because the hero can then defeat the bad guy. If you don't have something for the hero to struggle against, some really nasty cunt that needs to be destroyed, if you don't have that, then the hero can't really shine. Because the hero himself is always going to be slightly bland, naturally speaking. Because the hero represents goodness, and the hero represents normality, and the hero represents heterosexuality, and essentially it's the man rescuing the girl, or rescuing the children, or protecting the family, or protecting the country. That's what it's always about. The hero is generally speaking might be a little bit quirky, but he's always going to be straight and normal. What makes him shine is the fact that he has to struggle against something which is very evil. And one of the things I see lacking in many stories is they don't have a really nasty, bad guy, so the hero can't really come out and shine, right? This story doesn't have that problem. This story's got a different problem. It doesn't have a hero. It's got some nasty people in it, but it doesn't have a hero to bring out, or to give any moral impetus to the story, any moral motivation, any moral movement. There's nothing there. I read the entire book and I just could not care less about any of the characters, whether they lived or died, which is always a bad theme. If you don't care about the characters, if you don't want the bad guy to die and the good guy to succeed, then what kind of story have you got? Right? You've got a lot of sex and a lot of drugs and a lot of swirling around, but at the end of the day, nothing to really sink your teeth into. So that was the first, and I'll explain that in more depth later. But that was my first reason why I didn't really like the book. The second reason was it was just too long. There's not enough plot. The book's about, I can't remember now, 400 or 500 pages long. It should have been 200 pages long. If it was the same size as like The Great Gatsby or something like that, then, you know, it would have been better. But there's not much plot. Not much happens. The entire story is essentially it's a threesome with somebody watching, right? It's a love triangle with a fourth person added who's the observer and who also gets involved. And it's two people ripping off one person, and it just drags out. Like there's not really there's just not much that happens. There's not many murders. I mean, there's a death at the end. There's not even that much sex. There's the temptation of sex. There's the insinuation of sex throughout the book. But Nicola Six, who is she a femme fatale? I mean, I guess she is the seductress, right? The main character of the story, who's got these three men wrapped around her fingers. She's not really putting out, not until the end of the book. It's all about like just men just like crawling on their knees trying to get into her vagina. But we don't get lots of action in the book. Just it's like being teased for 400 pages. At least in Money, I seem to remember people actually had sex. Here you've just got the temptation of it. So not much happens. The book could have been 200 pages shorter. So that's the second reason I didn't like it. The third reason was just, to be honest, I'm going to throw this in as a reason, but to be fair to the author, it's not really, I don't know. I mean, it didn't really have to write about this, but I just kind of wished and I felt and I wanted the book to be more about London. Now, obviously, the title is London Fields, which apparently is a place near Hackney. The story is not actually set in London Fields. It's set in a different part of London. I think it's Notting Hill. But anyway, the book's called London Fields. Kind of an oxymoron in itself, okay, because London's a city, a field is something you find in the countryside. So a curious title for a book, kind of captures the mind. But I was hoping, one of the reasons why I wanted to read this book is, as I just said, like, firstly, it's because I read Money and I enjoyed that, but also because I heard that Damon Albarn took this book as the inspiration for Parklife, the album by Blur, which came out in the 90s, right? Great album, very, very British, peak Britpop album, really good fun. This book is obviously written in the late 80s. It's set in 1999. So it's like a 90s book. It's not a 90s book, but it's just about, it's the old London, okay? Before Blair destroyed everything. And I wanted to have some kind of, I don't know, man, I wanted like, I don't even know if this pop culture reference is true. This is just something I read on the internet years ago. And for whatever reason, it's always just stuck in my head. And because Parklife itself as an album is obviously, it's a whole bunch of different stories about London or about, Britain at that time, I just kind of felt I was going to get more of a pastiche, more of a mosaic of London, right? I wanted to get more name dropping. I wanted to hear the names of the streets, essentially. I wanted more pop culture references. I wanted more of the spirit of that age to kind of shine through. I wanted to be more like James Joyce's Dubliners. I know this is totally unfair and unreasonable for me to say this, because this is not really what the book's about. It's just a book that's set in London at that time. But nonetheless, that is what I wanted from the book, and the book didn't deliver it. I can't help thinking of a comedy sketch which I remember watching in the 90s. I cannot remember the name of the comedian, but he did a sketch, and it's all about, I'm going to kind of try and paraphrase this because I don't really remember it very well, but essentially The joke was about ordinary English people and the way that they react to somebody who goes and visits London, and the way that ordinary people will pretend that they have a great local knowledge of the city centre. And so the joke was all about, somebody goes to London and they visit, let's say, Paddington, right? And let's say somebody from Devon, right? Someone from the West Country, they go to London for whatever reason, visit a friend or family member or whatever in the 90s. And they come back to Devon and they're telling, and they say, oh, where did you go? And it's like, oh, Paddington. Oh, yes, I know that. I've been there. Or, oh, I know the road. Oh, the tube station. Yes, I know where you get off the tube to go in there. So it's kind of like people in the 90s, just about every British person in the 90s had some kind of knowledge, or like to pretend at least that they had some kind of knowledge or connection with the city of London. They took a pride in the fact that they'd been there and they knew something about it, and they knew Oxford Street, they knew Mayfair, they knew Paddington, they knew Hackney, they knew all these places. They'd been to the National Gallery, etc., etc. They walked along the River Thames, etc., etc. Right? They'd heard Big Ben, they'd gone to Westminster Abbey, etc., etc. People of England had a pride of London, and a pride of a geographical knowledge of London, because people of England were proud of the city, and it was obviously the cultural centre of the country, and a cultural centre worldwide. I mean, it's London, for Christ's sake, right? Nowadays, that pride is completely gone. You just don't see it anymore. It's totally changed. Nobody says, oh yeah, I went to London and this, that and the other. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to visit. Nobody wants to move there. Like the whole idea of the streets of London are paved with gold. I'm going to go to London and make money, and nobody wants to go to London to make money. A very small amount of people will go. They'll make a big pile of money in the city working in Forex or banking or whatever, because that's just about the only thing we do in this country now. They'll make a pile of money and they'll get out, right? And open a restaurant or something, right? Get out, go to the white suburb somewhere, get away from the multiculturalism, because London's a shithole now, and it's full of Muslims and it's full of foreigners, and people are getting stabbed left, right, and centre. And I even saw a video. I should have played this on the show actually, but I mean, I saw a video. Some guy, like young dude in his 20s, well-spoken, middle-class guy, and he was just making a video complaining about how his phone had been stolen. But he wasn't even complaining about his phone being stolen. He was complaining about the fact that he had brought a kind of wrist attachment which connected to the phone to stop it being stolen. So like you put the phone in a case, and then it's got like a chain on it, and then it's like tied to your wrist. So when a gypsy comes along and snatches it out of your hand, they can't grab it, right? But so this guy brought one of these, but when his phone was stolen, he just snapped it out of his hand. The wrist attachment didn't work. So he's complaining about that in a very casual manner. He wasn't even complaining about the fact his phone was stolen, really, right? That was just like a matter of fact. That was just like an accepted thing for him. It's like, oh, you live in London, your phone's going to get snatched out of your hand while you're walking down the street by some hoodie on a electric scooter, right? That's just taken for granted. No, he was complaining about the fact that the wrist attachment security device snapped. He was annoyed about that, right? So this is the state of London now. People just take it for granted you're going to get robbed. You're just going to get mugged. That's it. You go to London, you get mugged, right? So it's a shithole. And nobody takes any pride in it anymore because it's full of foreigners. Half the people that live there were born outside of England. And so because of all of this, I was just thinking, man, I could read London Fields, it was the inspiration for Park Life. I'm going to get this deep kind of 80s, 90s nostalgia trip for London. And the book didn't really serve that art. But I mean, to be fair to Martin Amis, that's not really, he didn't really promise that as part of the novel. But I do think the book would have been better if he'd brought that out more. More phrases. I just want to read a book where London's personified. I want to hear about the rain on the streets. I want to hear about the weather. I want to hear about London in the morning, London in the afternoon, London in the evening. I want to hear the names of the streets, the names of the famous people that lived there, the old people, the young people, like a mosaic of colours and sounds and tastes, a snapshot of the city in that period. Because it's gone now. It's gone. It's washed away, right? The 90s is over. I've been talking about this a little bit on the internet. There's this idea of the long 90s. My theory is that it ended with that movie with, what's his name? Simon Pegg in it. What's it called? They go on a pub crawl. The End of the World. Yeah. The End of the World. Yeah, he plays a character who is it's quite a good idea for the end of the idea being that culturally speaking, the 90s went through from, I guess, 91, fall of the Soviet Union, right? It's the end of history. American liberalism won, okay, which essentially is Wilsonian idealism, right? Most people don't know this, but we do live kind of in the age of Wilsonian idealism. What does that mean? That means, it means that you had Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of America. The guy who established the Fed, the guy who brought America into the First World War, and the guy who advocated for a new world order. And the new world order means the destruction of the old world. In order to have the new world order, you have to take away the old world order. So the old world order was the order of the British Empire and the French Empire and European imperialism, European domination of the world, European colonialism. And Wilson destroyed that. He established, first of all, the League of Nations, and of course the Second World War happened. British Empire collapsed, United Nations came in, and the goal of Wilsonian idealism was to basically create America across the world, the American Republic worldwide, the American model of government worldwide, right? That was the dream, and it struggled for a long time against the Soviet Union. Soviet Union collapsed, 1991, and then boom, you got the 90s, the end of history. Liberalism won. Everybody's a democracy now. Everybody's doing democracy. We succeeded. That's it. It's supposed to be all over. But of course, it wasn't all over because 9/11 happened, Islam happened, multiculturalism happened, and all kinds of crazy stuff has happened, and it's all come crashing down now. Essentially, you could argue Rotherham is the end of Wilsonian idealism. How about that for a statement? Rotherham. The end of... because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You invite these foreigners into your country and they don't integrate, they don't mix, and then they rape schoolgirls. Okay? And it's not working, and multiculturalism has failed. Right? And so there's been a struggle. Now Trump's been re-elected. Hopefully MAGA's going to push back against the wokeness, and I don't know. I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that in the 90s you had peak liberalism. You had the destruction of the Soviet Union. Looked like we'd all won. Looked like everything was going to be great, and there was kind of like a cultural boom, and this boom lasted all the way through the 90s, through the noughties, and I would argue in Britain it lasted all the way up till The World's End with Simon Pegg. That was the last great cultural creation of the long 90s, because we haven't really created any culture since. Nothing of any note. All of the movies these days are just they're cardboard cutouts of movie franchises that were started in the 80s, right? You got your Star Wars, you got your superhero movies, you got Alien, you got Terminator, you got Transformers, you got a whole bunch of ideas that were created 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? And no books are being written, right? Why am I reading Martin Amis's London Fields, a book that was written 30 something years ago? Nobody writes these days. I remember when I was a teenager, we used to have authors who were genuinely interesting. I remember, was it Alex Garland who wrote The Beach? You know, they turned that into a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. I read that before they made it into a movie. That was a great book. We had Ian Banks doing science fiction. We had Terry Pratchett doing his Ringworld. I mean, Terry Pratchett, right? The world's original flat earther. But people, they were writers, they were authors, there was something to be interested in. You could go into Waterstones and you could find somebody with something to say. You can't find that anymore because the feminists have taken over the book industry. They are the editors. They say what books get published and what don't, and their stories are shit and boring. Maybe they're interesting for women, maybe. I'm doubtful, but maybe. But for men, there's nothing for men that's in any way interesting. Nobody reads. It's quite amazing. Nobody reads. This is not normal, and people blame this on social media and video games. But you know, we had TV back in the 90s, and people still read books. We had video games, and people still read books. I don't think you can blame it all on social media and TikTok and etc. etc. I think part of the blame has to go on the fact that there are no interesting authors anymore. And we live in such an interesting age. We live in an age of multiculturalism and clash of ideology and wokeism and men being oppressed and pushed down and told they're guilty and they're bad and etc. etc. Who is telling this story? Who is telling the story of London now? Multicultural, multiracial London, the London of Sadiq Khan. Who's writing any book? Who's writing a book about that? Nobody. It's just dead. So it's kind of sad. So anyway, I'm going on a bit of a ramble here, a bit of a tangent. But the point being, I'm trying to get to is one of the reasons I wanted to read this book is because I have a nostalgia for the old London. I wanted a mosaic of that London. I wanted the tastes and the sights and the sounds. I wanted to hear the names of the roads. I wanted to hear the fashion labels that people wore, the TV shows that they were watching at that time, the music that they were listening to, the food that they were eating, their thoughts, their feelings. I wanted that to come out. I wanted to hear the beating heart of London in the late 80s. And in the 90s, but I didn't get it at all. So that's a disappointment, because that beating heart is dead now because of Rotherham, essentially, which is a point which I repeat again and again, but I should do, because it's the death of the nation. The soul of the nation died with Rotherham. Why did it die with Rotherham? Because we allowed foreign men to come to our country and to rape schoolgirls, and we, the English men, did nothing about it. Some did, a small minority, but the majority didn't. The majority looked away. They turned their heads away and they didn't want anything to do with it. And it was at that point that the lefties and the foreigners, they realized they'd had us beaten. They had us beat, right? It's like, I knew it, you know, coming back to the subject of London, I knew an old London gangster. He's dead now, unfortunately. He was a gypsy and used to be a bouncer in London and got up to all kinds of shenanigans. He told me that, like, he got one reason he made his name is because he had to beat some guy up, and he said he grabbed the guy by his leg, and then he got into a car and he was like driving down the road with this guy, like dragging this guy behind him. Anyway, tough dude, right? And I just remember him telling me the story of, like, he had a protege, like some young lad in his firm, like working for him, young muscle, and and like there was some kind of confrontation between this young guy that he was kind of like, teaching. I don't know much about what gangsters do, but teaching the ways, right? And there was a confrontation between him and some other older guy, some other bouncer who was also a tough dude. And he said the older guy kind of flinched, right? He kind of went, ooh. Took a step back. He was like, all right, mate, calm down. And for him, being a street thug, he knew straight away, like the older guy was scared of the younger guy. Okay, so in a similar way, like the Muslims and the left wing that protect the Muslims at Rotherham, they came to understand that the British public flinched. The men of England flinched. We were scared. We were scared. We're scared of Islam. We're scared of the foreigners, and we're scared of being called racist, and etc. 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 And yeah, we will let you rape schoolgirls and get away with it because we're cowards. And that's it. That's been the end of the country since then. That's why no artwork has been created in the last decade, because you can't create great art unless you have some kind of military prowess, in my opinion. You just can't really do it. I mean, look at all of the great centers of culture. They all have it's military conquest first, and then the culture follows afterwards. You have to have balls. You have to have some swagger. You have to have something you want to say and be able to say it. If you're morally broken, if you've been conquered by another group of people like we have done in this country, then how can you create anything? You've got no moral high ground to say anything about anything. So that's why there's no good music, no good films, no books being written. It's just dead. It's a waste ground. Anyway, slightly miserable. But nonetheless, that's how I feel about London. The book's called London Fields. That's why I read the book. I wanted to get this nostalgia dose. It didn't happen. A little bit disappointed about it. But to be fair to Martin Amis, it's not really what the book's about. But I just think, like, if I could edit the book, I'd say, Martin, mate, can you make it, first of all, 200 pages shorter? Second of all, can you put, like, at least one character in there that's, like, has some kind of redeeming characteristic that's kind of good? Can we have one good character to outshine the other three shit characters? And thirdly, tell us some more about London, mate. And then the book would have been great. It would have been a classic. But as it stands, didn't really enjoy it that much. So what's the story all about? Sorry that this is at the 28-minute mark and I haven't told you the plot. I am rambling this, in case you haven't noticed. I am absolutely winging this and filling it up with filler because I don't really have anything deep or profound or meaningful to say about this book. It's kind of a struggle. I'm actually reading William Gibson's Neuromancer at the moment, and I'm reading the other following novels, and I will be doing that probably next week, and that's going to be easy. I can sit down and talk for an hour about cyberpunk quite easily because it's science fiction and I know the genre really well, and I can just go boop, boop, boop into it. When it comes to a story like this, I'm kind of lost for things to say. It's hard for me, but especially as I didn't really enjoy the book. But nonetheless, I will struggle through, and I'll try to say something, because in case you guys haven't noticed, this is the plan. This is the modus operandi. I read a book, and then I sit and I talk about it for an hour. That's what I do. That's what keeps me going. That's what drives me forward. That's what I think will save me personally, and save the country, and save Western civilization. The reading of books, the reading of the classics, and the chewing over and digesting of the classics. Alright? Because all of the knowledge of Western civilization is contained in the books. People these days, they just don't read the books. Okay? Let's talk about Joe Rogan. Donald Trump goes on the Joe Rogan podcast. Why? The mighty Joe Rogan. Really, I mean, I believe in hierarchy, and Joe Rogan is like a king, essentially. All the famous people of the world, they want to go on the Joe Rogan show and talk to Joe Rogan and have Joe Rogan ask them questions. That's the way it works. He's the king of the podcast. He's the king of the new media. He has an incredible influence, and he is respected as being a great thinker, essentially. But does he have any classical education? And if you watch any of the Joe Rogan podcast, do you get any sense of the classics coming through? Because I don't. I never hear anybody talk about the Iliad or the Dante's Divine Comedy or Milton's Paradise Lost, or even the historical happenings like the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Reformation, the medieval period, the Crusades, the Roman Empire. Like you don't get any sense of history coming through the Joe Rogan podcast. And you may say, well, it's just the Joe Rogan podcast. Well, he does represent like a kind of like an intellectual peak, doesn't he? That's where all the clever people go. And he does read. He's not stupid, but everything he reads is contemporary. There's no sense of history in America now. Not that I can see. I struggle to think of an intellectual on the internet who has that kind of gravitas. Peter Hitchens has got it, because he reads. E. Michael Jones has got it. I guess you could argue Sargon's got a little bit of it, but most just don't really seem. I don't feel it coming across, essentially. And I think if you look at Western civilization when we were at our peak, there was an expectation that your average middle class man who was aspiring to rise up the social scale, there was an expectation that they would read the classics. They would know about the Odyssey, right? They would know something about the Roman Empire. They would know something about Shakespeare, right? And they would know these stories. They would be able to talk about them. They would be able to converse about them, and thus they would be respected. And if you'd have tried to move into intellectual circles and you didn't know anything about these subject matters, you'd be laughed at as a fool, essentially. So there was a snobbiness, and you could say that snobbishness was bad, but it forced people to read, and by forcing people to read, it forced people to understand the culture and the history, and etc., etc. Nowadays, you can be considered to be a respected, intelligent person, even though you've never read the Iliad, right? You just got a bunch of contemporary knowledge in your head. You've got this new guy, Stephen Edgington, right? The Zoomer dude, works for GB News. He's interviewing people left, right, and centre. And every time he interviews a Tory politician, he asks them, well, who's your favourite Prime Minister? If you can't pick, who's your favourite Tory Prime Minister? If you can't pick Thatcher and you can't pick Churchill, can you name one? And Suella Braverman couldn't, because she doesn't know who they are, because she doesn't know any history. She's just like, oh, I'm not a historian, I don't know. She doesn't even know the history of her own party, right? So the people that lead the country are not well read. They haven't got a clue what they're doing. They're not intelligent. So how do we win the fight in the long term? In order to win the fight in the long term, you have to read the classics, and you have to talk about the classics, and you have to establish a new intellectual class that knows history and is connected with it and can speak about it fluently, and then we can push back against all of this bullshit and we can win. Otherwise, you've just got reactionary people on the internet, just your Steve Woods, your Paul Joseph Watson. Like, it's not that I dislike these people. I think they're okay people, but their reaction is a shallow reaction. That's why it's called reactionary politics. They see bad things happening, and then they just go, oh, imagine my shock, right? Oh, look at this immigrant doing this. Look at this terrible thing the government's doing. And it's like, okay, it's not bad. It's good to have a reaction. It's good to have people pointing out all the bullshit. But it's just kind of shallow. It's just kind of shallow. It's not deep. It's got no substance to it. In the past, social reformers of the Victorian period, or whatever, working class people who had worked up, raised themselves up, they would read. In order to raise themselves up, they would say, right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to read all these books in order to educate myself so that I can speak about this, this, and this. Nowadays, people don't even bother. It's just considered unnecessary. And they're not shy about it at all. So you've just got massive sprawl of just uneducated people sitting on the internet talking shit, and no one's got any clue whatsoever what they're talking about. And I'm not claiming to be very well read, because obviously I'm not, but at least I have read some of the classics, and I'm slowly chewing through them. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but the point is, like, after being on the internet for like 8 years, I've just kind of settled into a certain rhythm. Like, I just can't be bothered with making short videos anymore, because, like, what can you say in 10 minutes anyway? You know, in 10 minutes, you like open up a subject matter, say 1 or 2 or 3 things about it, and then you got to shut the video down. I mean, it's okay, but I just don't have the energy to, like, be churning out YouTube videos one after the other, because, you know, I'm shadow banned anyway, and YouTube can just switch off my account like that anyway, so, like, why bother? So I'm just getting more into the rhythm of read a book, digest it, speak about it for an hour, move on to the next book, and just rinse and repeat. Aiming for like 50 books a year, hopefully. We'll see. And that feels to me to be a natural and nice rhythm. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. That's why I'm sitting down for an hour to talk about a book which I didn't really enjoy, and I don't really have anything intelligent to say about it. But nonetheless, this entire 1 hour is just filler. Okay, if you're listening to this, you're listening to filler. This is why in the media industry, this is known as excuse me, filler. So well done, good for you for plowing through it, but at least it gives you an insight into what I'm trying to say here, or what I'm thinking. But it's part of the challenge. Excuse me, because another part, the first part is you've got to do reading. Another part of Western civilization that we've lost. First of all, people don't read. Second of all, nobody gives speeches anymore. Right? The oration, the art of the oration has been lost. The art of the sermon has been lost. Okay, so this is one of the key features of the Reformation, because before the Reformation, Catholic Church, you know, it was very, very ritualistic, in that people would go to church and all the prayers would be in Latin, and they kind of sit there and it'd be and they wouldn't really understand what's going on, but they'd kind of be in awe of the priests doing their mystical magic. And the Reformation came along, started educating people, started getting people to read, because, right, the printing press was there as well, of course, and started giving sermons, and you had vicars preaching and talking about the Bible, and blah, 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 blah. And this has led to an explosion in culture and an explosion in education. And there was a time in this country where people all around the country would go to church and they'd hear the vicar speak on Sunday, and he'd speak for an hour, and he would have to be reasonably well educated, and he'd have to have something decent to say in order to capture the audience. So people had the ability to listen to a great speech and be inspired by it, and you had speakers who wanted to do that. In the modern age, where does that exist? It doesn't exist. You've got podcasts. I mean, I do a podcast once a week, 3 hours, which is just rambling, me and SJJ going back and forth, which is fun. I don't have a problem with it. it's good that that kind of thing is there, but it's also kind of a little bit low IQ, a little bit banter, a little bit back and forth. It's a conversation. It's nice to listen to, but where is the modern day Bowden? Okay, I want to hear a Jonathan Bowden speak for an hour about an interesting subject matter and just go into it, explain it, blow my mind away, and then I'm like, wow, I've learned something about that today. You know what I mean? That's what I would like. And people are constantly saying, oh, we need to rally the British public. We need to go to meetings and protest. I don't want to go to a meeting. I don't want to go to well, you can if you want. You might get arrested. It's up to you. But what I would think would rally the people is the sermon, the oration, right? I want to see the Sargon of Akkad speaking tour, where he goes around the country and he stands in front of an audience and he speaks for an hour. And it doesn't even have to be political. He could talk about the flipping Peloponnesian War or whatever he wants to. You know, whatever, dude. Like, blow my mind away. I want to hear something amazing about Western culture and Western civilization and history, and something fantastic, something that I come out and I'm like, wow, that was interesting. That's what I want. So we need to go back to that. We need to get the great speakers. We need to have orations that blow people's minds away. For me, it's all boiled down to a simple method of read a book, talk about it for an hour. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. I'm sorry for the long tangent. 41 minutes in. 41 minutes of filler. There you go. But at least you know what I'm trying to achieve here. I've been spacing out on this. I got to be honest with you, because my reading skills, I don't know. I've had a busy. I've been kind of out of it last 6 months. But I've had a recent realization which has kind of changed everything, which is that I've stopped drinking so much coffee, because the coffee and the sugar just blows my mind away. And I've been in the habit for a long time, waking up, having a coffee first thing in the morning, and I'm just kind of spaced out and jittery because of the caffeine and what have you. But if I don't have any coffee and sugar, I can sit and read much more easily. I can sit for 2 hours and just read. So my reading has vastly improved actually over the last few weeks, since actually it's not even last week or so, since I stopped drinking coffee. So hopefully we're going to crack on more of this now and churn out more of this content now that I've got that under control. But anyway, I don't know, touch wood, see what happens. Anyway, back to the book. That's enough filler. London Fields. What can we... So those are the 3 reasons why I didn't like the book. Okay, what is the story of the book? Basically, you've got an author, Samson, I think his name is, Sam for short. To be honest with you, it's another problem with this book, because I didn't enjoy it. I got halfway through it and I put it down. And then I picked it up 6 months later, or maybe even a year later, and finished it. So I can't even remember like the first part of the book, but I really got fed up with these shitty characters. And I've been looking at a lot of book reviews, and a lot of people say, oh, I love it, the sex, the drug. There's hardly any sex in the book. There's not, like I said before, there's a temptation of sex. Nothing happens. There's no murder. The murder comes at the end. Literally nothing happens. It's an empty book. But anyway, I didn't enjoy it, so I put it down, picked it up 6 months later, so I'm a bit sketchy on the plot. But basically, there's a writer, an American writer, who's terminally ill. Okay, this is one of the great underlying themes of this book, death. He's terminally ill, and he's got writer's block. And he comes to London, and he's staying in the flat of a friend of his who is a successful writer, and he's very envious of him. And he ends up going to a pub called the Black Cross, right? Cross has got 4 lines, 4 people. And he meets Keith, right, the scumbag of the book, and he meets a guy called Guy, the kind of the foe, right, the guy that gets ripped off in the book, the mug. And he meets Nicholas Six, the heroine, perhaps, of the book, whatever she is. He meets these three people, and he discovers that by one way or another, I think Nicholas Six throws her diaries out and he reads them or something like this. But anyway, he ends up discovering that Nicholas Six is this beautiful half-caste woman. All men are attracted to her. Everybody wants to have sex with her. She very easily controls men. She's very mysterious. Nobody knows where her money comes from, what she does, whatever. But men just like kill themselves for her, you know. And she wants to die. First of all, she wants to die because she's getting old, right? She's in her 30s now. She's losing her beauty. And secondly, she has a premonition. She's able to see into the future, and she knows that she's going to die, and she knows that somebody's going to murder her, and she's happy with it. So he discovers this, and he says, well, you know, can I watch you? Can you just, like, tell me the story, and then I'll turn it into a book? And she's like, fine. She goes along with it. So what happens is she essentially teams up with the scumbag, who's a guy called Keith, who's a thug, who beats up his wife and steals from people and just doesn't have a job. He's just a thief and a scumbag, right? But strong guy, good at fighting, and has sex with all the women. All the women love him, right? She gets him wrapped around her little finger, and she gets Guy wrapped around her little finger. Guy is a rich guy who comes from, you know, his wife isn't giving him any sex. He's got a young child called Marmaduke who's just trashing the house. So he's very unhappy. He thinks his wife's cheating on him, but the guy's a total mug. He ends up coming to the Black Cross, sort of making friends with Keith, sort of. Not really friends. Keith doesn't really have any friends. But anyway, they know each other, you know. And, yeah. Sorry, computer shut down there a little bit. But, yeah, they know each other. And anyway, Nicholas Six decides she's got it in her head she's going to be murdered, and she wants to rip off Guy. So she kind of seduces Guy, tells Guy this whole story about how she's a virgin and how she's got a childhood friend, and the childhood friend is trapped in Cambodia or something like this with her child. And basically she squeezes Guy for money. She gets money out of him and then gives the money to Keith. And the book just drags on like this for like 100 or 200 or 300 pages of just like Guy going around her place, and Keith's there, and he's like scratching. Why is Keith here? Nicholas Six doesn't even have sex with Keith. Nicholas Six, because Keith's a porn addict as well, she'll make videos of herself, and then Keith will go around her apartment and like jack off to videos of Nicholas Six. So everybody's getting dick teased. Nobody gets to fuck Nicholas Six. She's just dangling her vagina in front of these three men who are just like, ugh. And you could say, well, don't you sympathize with Guy? Isn't he kind of like the hero? Well, no, because Guy knows that Keith is a thief. There's a scene early in the book where they rip off some old lady, right? He goes in there, he just totally rips her off, takes all her money from her. Guy knows all about this. He doesn't do anything about it. He doesn't care. So not only is he just a mug, he doesn't care. He has no morals. So it's very difficult to sympathize for him as a hero. So essentially you've got three horrible people teaming up on one absolute mug of a human being. And I guess maybe you're supposed to sympathize with Guy, but you don't really, because he's an idiot. And this drags on for 100, 200, 300, 400 pages. And there's a plot in there about, you know, Keith obviously is a dart player, and he wants to like become famous, and Nicola is encouraging him, and this, that, and the other. And then finally, the crescendo of the book, there's a darts tournament. Guy has already been kicked out. You know, his wife's kicked him out. He's declared that he's in love because Nicola demands, right? Not only does she take money from Guy, she wants to completely break him and humiliate him. Why? I don't know. I don't know why she has this hatred of men. It's very interesting. But she's just takes sadistic pleasure in hurting men for some reason. But, Guy is absolutely infatuated with her. And she says, well, I can't be with you unless you tell your wife. So he tells his wife, she throws him out. And then they're just about to have sex. And then she's like, no, I can't do it unless you tell everybody in your family. So the guy has to get on a plane, fly to America, and go around and tell all of his relatives and this, that, and that about... It's just absurd, like how this guy grovels on the floor for Nicholas Six, So then he goes through this massive humiliation ritual and finally comes back and realizes that she's been screwing Keith all along. Actually, she only fucked Keith once, right at the end. But anyway, whatever. Goes to the darts tournament. Keith's there. This is his big chance, his big breakthrough. Or like Keith is totally obsessed with darts. He just wants to be a darts champion, right? That's his whole thing. Nicola's been supporting him on this journey. And it's the tournament, it's there. He's there with her. Guy turns up, says to Nicola, you're coming home with me, right? And she's like, no, I'm not. And laughs in his face. And Keith's like, yeah, fuck off, mate. Jog on. And then Nicola reveals. And then Nicola turns on Keith and embarrasses him as well by walking off with Keith's opponent in the darts tournament. I can't remember the guy's name. But this other dude. So now Keith's totally like confused and embarrassed and ridiculed. And he loses the darts tournament, confronts Guy. Guy beats him up. So Guy actually turns out, he finds himself a spine at the end. That's the one good part of the book, I suppose. Guy finally finds a pair of balls, beats the guy up, and then you get the massive plot twist at the end of the book. It's not really a plot twist. The thing about the story is gravity. The entire book is moving towards Nicola's death. She knows she's going to die. The book lays out quite clearly that Keith is the killer, but she doesn't say who the killer is going to be. We assume it's going to be Keith because he's the thug. But then we're dangling, the obvious plot twist with that it would be Guy. So then you think maybe the plot twist is that the plot twist isn't the plot twist, and actually it turns out to be Keith after all. It's a bit confusing. In the end, it turns out to be the narrator who kills her. Tells her to get in the car. She gets in willingly, and I think it just bashes her head in with an iron bar or something. That's the end of her, and that's the end of the story. So it's a story about death, and I just it's a crazy, weird story. I can't really make head nor tail of it. I can't really a lot of people love this book. A lot of people thought it was brilliant and it was fun. I thought it was like getting dick teased for 400 pages. I gotta say, just the plot just dragged. It just dragged. At least with the other novel, Money, the main character was going back and forth. England, America. There was more movement. There was more things happening. This was just like waiting for something to happen for 400 pages. And then it finally happens, and it's like, oh, okay. So, man, yeah, it should have been 200 pages shorter. What was the book about from a thematic point of view? Oh, it's about death. She knows she's going to die. Samson, the writer, he knows he's going to die. These two people, I guess they're on a death wish together, something like this. You have this apocalypse happening in the background. None of the characters care, by the way. But there's the book is set in 1999. And there's supposed to be some kind of massive disaster, like nuclear war. It's not clear what the war is, what's going on. Nobody really understands. But there's some kind of thing in the background, I guess just to add atmospheric tension. So it's about that. And essentially it's about, it's essentially just about a seduction. It's about, Nicholas Six is an interesting character, but she's just a girl with a death wish, and she just takes 3 men, wraps them all around her little finger, plays with them, and ends up getting killed by one of them, and doesn't care. Which I suppose is how she's able to seduce them. Because, like, you have to be a bit of a psychopath to seduce somebody and not actually care. But she doesn't care about... she doesn't care about any of them. And she ends up dying. She ends up getting her head smashed in. And that's the end of the movie. That's the end of the book. And at the end, like, there's a little bit, what happens to the characters afterwards? Keith just carries on being Keith. Guy just carries on being Guy. And that's it. Right? That's it. That's all I got. Sorry. I just didn't really get the book. I didn't really get it. I didn't really see the attraction of these scummy people being scummy to each other. And yeah, they tried to make a movie out of it. What's her face was in it? Amber Heard was in it. Came out in 2018. I haven't bothered watching it. It was a flop. Budget of 8 million. Box office 487,000. Yeah. So maybe I'll watch it one day, but it's just, whatever. And that's it, guys. That's London Fields. That's all I got. Don't have anything interesting to say. There's a whole thing about unreliable narrator, because the book's kind of like, on the one hand, it's narrated by the Samson guy, and on the other hand, it's narrated by nobody, God, whoever writes, who's the usual narrator of a book, right? The infinite observer. So there's an, like, who's saying what? Is any of this true? What's really happening? God knows. So there's that aspect to it. But all in all, I just found it to be kind of like a pointless, kind of grimy story. And that's it. That's it. That's all I got. That's all I got, guys. There's no children in the book. There are 2 children in the book. There's Marmaduke, just considered to be a complete nuisance. And then there's Keith's baby daughter, who's being abused. We think it's Keith that's abusing, but it turns out to be Keith's wife, who's just, like, obviously Keith just beats her up and he's horrible to her all the time. She takes it out on the little baby. All the children in the book are just mistreated or uncared for and considered to be unnecessary. The characters don't care about the children. The characters don't care about the country, the state of the nation that they live in. They don't care about anything. The author just is perfectly willing to watch a young lady die just so he can write a story about it and get famous and get money. Everybody's a cunt in this book. I mean, it's also just a fatalistic book. It's like, if like Nicholas Six wanted to commit suicide and she was doing all this just to, goad these men on so that one of them killed her, that would be a different type of story. But it's not even that. She's doing it because she saw it. She saw it in the future. She had some kind of psychic premonition and she knew it would happen. And so she's just marching along to her fate. So it's just like, it's difficult to even hate her as a kind of seductress and destroyer of men, because she's just going through the motions. It's like, this is a bad story that had to happen, and she knew it had to happen, and she just kind of accepted it and went along with it. So it's difficult to even, like, thoroughly dislike her, There's like a hidden hand to the story that pushes the whole thing forward. God, I suppose, or fate, or karma, or whatever, that just made this story happen. And all the characters just fit into their roles, and they play along with it, and then it's done, and it's happened, and fizzles out, and that's the end of it. I just can't make head nor tail of it. I really don't know what to make of it. I need some. I've looked at a few different reviews and people talking about it, and I don't know, man. I don't know about this book. So anyway, there you go. That's my review. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Have a nice day. Goodbye.